Thank you very much. Welcome. I'm so happy to be talking today. I'm very excited. I wasn't expecting so many people, so thank you very much. I'm Alice Mouton. I'm a senior content designer. I've been at Malt for 3 years now. And for those who don't know us, Malt is Europe's leader in freelancing management. Our clients and freelancers choose us to manage their project from end to end, from an easy and rapid search to a secured invoicing, compliance, and payment management system. But let's get right into our topic of the day and talk about quality in AI conversations. Now, before we start, I would like us to take a few minutes to think about what quality is in AI conversations. Because if you ask an engineer, they might say that quality is all about accuracy, about your agent not hallucinating. If you talk to a product manager, for example, they might say that it's all about task completion rate, NPS, and so on. But if you ask a user, they might just say that it gets me. And this part, right here in the middle, is maybe one of the hardest ones to grasp, to build, and a very expensive one to just ignore. Because you see, quality in AI conversations is not just about your output being correct. It's about your outputs feeling right. They are coherent, trustworthy, and overall human. And this gap between technically correct and actually good is a language problem, not an infrastructure problem. So today I would like to share with you a framework to bridge that gap and to help you build good, qualitative conversational agents, whether they are internal or user-facing. But just to make sure that we all are aligned about what quality actually looks like, let's look at a couple of examples. Now, what happens if I don't set up my conversational agent? What happens is I may have an answer that is very generic. The agent might give some irrelevant items in the outputs, not inaccurate, but just irrelevant for my user. And the overall conversation would feel very isolated from the overall user journey, right? But then what happens if I do invest and set up in my agent? What happens for the exact same request is that I have now an answer that is extremely relevant for a given user in a given context. My answer is also very well structured. It is visually pleasing, it is easily scannable, well understood. I also have an agent that shows some kind of empathy, some kind of emotional intelligence. And in this case, the whole conversation is now embedded into your journey and easily actionable. But what has changed between these two versions? So I'm going to share with you the 3 fundamentals, linguistic fundamentals, that make a conversation feel good. So the first thing that changed is that this conversation, the high-quality one, is cooperative. So linguistics tells us that successful conversation comply with 4 principles: quality, quantity, relevance, and manner. What does that look like? So about the quality, it means that we only say what we know is true, and in terms of quantity, we don't want to have long speeches, right? We don't want to have long paragraphs, so we try to declutter the output, the response. In terms of relevance, as much as in quality, we want to make it relevant for the user, as I said, in a given context. So we are going to cherry pick the most relevant information for them. And manner, what do we mean by that? We mean that we want an output that is easily understood by everyone. So through all the different factors that I just showed, but also through, for example, here adding a couple of trustworthy links that builds overall the trust and the actionability of the output. The second thing that changed is that the conversation is contextualized. Again, linguistics tells us that context pretty much is everything in conversation. And for your AI agent, it means that they need to be able to catch, understand, memorize, and reuse the user context. And not just the context from your request, but maybe the context from the start of the conversation, from another session, or even from your profile settings. And it can be very subtle in the way that it translates into your outputs. So in this instance, we have a very obvious yet simple example. The agent was able to translate this year into 2026 and not 2027 or 2025. But we could also imagine that the agent knows that I've already visited BA Web or AIProductDay.com and that I found these two websites trustworthy. So it would push these two websites as a first option for me. Then the third thing that changed is that the conversation is functional. One thing that we often forget in digital interfaces is that a conversation is not just about sharing information. It's mainly about building bridges, building relationships, shaping emotions, and influencing decision-making process. Again, it can be very subtle in the way it translates, but remember when we said that my agent now shows some kind of emotional intelligence, right? So it understood that I was excited about my request and the AI event. So it tried to match my excitement with very subtle terminology choices and to leverage these emotions to push me buy tickets, basically. So these are the three, let's say, pillars, linguistic pillars, that will make your conversation good. But all this is very theoretical, right? So how do we, as designer, product manager, or engineer, how do we get there? So I'm going to share with you the framework that I used while defining the principles and guidelines for our conversational AI at Malt. For the sake of this presentation, I'm not going to be able to share the actual agents, but I will share this fake platform, AI event, and we will build an agent, AI conversational agent, of course, that help users find the right event for them based on pricing, location, and so on. Now, about the framework, it's quite an easy one, actually, and the first step of it is to define precisely the identity of the agent. And we are generally very eager to start prompting right away, right? But I would advise you never to do that, but instead start asking yourself a lot of precise questions. The idea is to ask yourself crisp, relevant, and precise questions that will help you define the different layers of an agent. And then to draw the answers from your business context, user knowledge, or product data. I'm going to share a couple of examples about questions and answers, but first, I would like us to look at these different layers that I'm talking about and understand what we need to address. Starting with the core identity. So before we start thinking about how the agents speak, we need to understand who it is. What kind of needs does it address? So that's the basic product framing, right? But we also want to make it human. So to that, we will add also a layer of values, ethics, and worldviews. What kind of boundaries should it not cross at any kind of situation? Then we need to define the personality of the agent. So how do we want our user to perceive this agent? Who is he? Then we need to define the mechanics. So basically is how the output, the speech, is structured. Will my agent be reactive or proactive? But it is also about how it will handle knowledge within a conversation. How will it handle a situation of disagreement, for example, with the user? And finally, the surface, of course. And the surface is the tip of the iceberg, is the most visible one. It's all about terminology, style, formatting, and so on. And when I say formatting, it's also the way that we are going to visualize and display the outputs. So back to our examples, starting with the core identity. As I said, the core identity is basically a product or feature framing. So our PMs in the room might know what I'm talking about, of course. But some question that you can ask yourself, of course, is what kind of need or gap does it solve? And here you will draw answers from your business metrics and so on. But I also talked about values, and these values are oftentimes similar to the one of your company. Then personality. Again, it's all about how I want my user to describe, to perceive my agent. Is it, I don't know, a supportive coach, for example? So again here, draw into your brand identity, your values as a company, etc. Then the mechanics. Here it's basically the conversational mechanics that will make your speech a little bit more fast or structured, right? So in this instance, I would like to think of how does it handle knowledge when the user is vague. Do I want, for example, my agent to assume, to be proactive, or to ask reactive? And here, it's interesting to draw answers from product data. So for example, our AI events, we know that our users, they are pretty tech-savvy, they want to stay on top of the trends, and they don't mind spending quite a while on the platform, browsing through events to find the right one. So we can define that our agent asks questions one at a time to make sure that we grasp the right information, the right context, to then propose the perfect event. And finally, the surface. As I said, the surface is the tip of the iceberg, so maybe you already have a lot of materials on that, your style guide, your glossary, your brand guidelines, and so on. But I want to take a second here because we often forget one thing that is very specific to AI conversations, the fact that we need to now rethink, reimagine how we display them visually to make them understandable and scalable. So here, of course, you're going to look at your design system and maybe create new components or adapt existing ones to make them AI ready. So now, at this stage, you should have defined the identity of your agent, the precise use cases, and the values. So now it's time to start writing the prompt. But again, let's not be too hasty, and let's not copy-paste our guidelines right into the instructions. Because if you do that, your agent is very likely to forget pretty much half of them or even to hallucinate. So what we're going to do instead is to translate your guidelines into the prompt. I found 3 techniques that are quite valuable. The first one is the idea to make everything very clear for the agent. So usually when we write guidelines, they are made for human interpretation, right? But an agent cannot interpret or understand what is implicit in your guidelines. So you're going to clarify everything in your prompt. You're going to give your agent example as to how to talk, how to structure the speech and how to behave in certain situations. The second technique is a bit more tricky because the idea here is to go beyond the technically correct and to make your agent sound human, sound good. So you're going to try to teach your agent social intelligence. The idea is to make it behave like a human and not sound robotic in some kind of not aligned with the user. So here what you're going to do is prepare a few scenarios that your agent can come across. And for that, I encourage you to, of course, talk to your users, but also look at interaction that your user already have with their product, to list these kind of scenarios and prepare the right answers for your agent. Explain to your agent how it should behave in these instances. Do not hesitate to provide examples, because that way your agent can replicate them as we go. Now, the third technique is about setting priorities within your guidelines and principles. Oftentimes, your guidelines and principles may collide in certain situations. It's perfectly normal and nothing to be afraid of. But again, a human being can understand when to use which guideline. An agent cannot, so you will have to teach it that. For example, here we decided that accuracy is our top priority, even before usefulness or tone. In this technique, you will also define how your agent should react, interact with the user, and what kind of emotions, for example, it should display in certain critical situations. Again, agents do not understand what is critical, so you will have to define that in your prompt. So these are the three techniques that I found really useful. It comes with a lot of iterations, of course. But now you have your prompts. And before you hand it over to your engineering team, I would advise you to test it a little bit. And what I did was to first A/B test it. So it was pretty easy. I created 2 proxy agents, one with the content guidelines and one without. And I asked both of them the same 10 to 20 questions, and of course compared the outputs. The generic one should sound well generic, and the one with your content guidelines should interact as you expect it to be. The second technique is to stress test it. So we set a lot of guidelines, a lot of guardrails and values to your agent, right? So now we need to make sure that in whatever situation, edge cases, crisis, your agent will behave exactly how we want it to be. So now you're going to try to break your agent. And for that, I advise you to ask your teammates, especially the ones who were not involved in this process, so that they can think of very specific critical situation that you may not have thought of. So now you have your prompts. You have handed it over to your engineering team. The content guidelines are within the overall prompt of your agent, and it's almost time to ship. But first, of course, we need to assess the quality. Now, I don't know if we have a lot of content experts in the room, but if you are a content expert, you should know that oftentimes content quality is viewed as, I like it, I do not like it. Of course, we can't afford that, as I said earlier. So I wanted to build a framework that is structured and objective. And the first step for that was to map all the steps within the user journey where my agent would intervene. Then, for each step, I defined which principles or guidelines the agent would need to leverage for it to be relevant and qualitative. I also defined here the exact criteria that can be measurable that I want to measure at this step. And then I defined for each of them, of course, some kind of test prompts. So these are things that the user could say. And here again, I advise you not just to work alone in this situation, but to look at past user interviews, calls with the sales team, or tickets with the customer care. And finally, the last step is to define how to measure. So it is about setting expected behaviors and fail indicators. So this basically is the boundaries of what makes or breaks your agentic and conversational experience. So it's very small, I'm sorry. I thought it would be a bit bigger, but basically this is how my framework looked like at the end. So with the different journey stage, principles, what to test prompt, and the expected behavior and fail indicators. To be honest, this process was a bit time-consuming to go all through every test prompt. So I wanted to automate it a little bit because LLM are very good to automate content assessment, actually. And what I did was to introduce the LLM-as-a-judge technique. So here, again, I created yet another agent, a judge, whose instructions were to look at my outputs and define whether they passed or failed based on the guidelines that we defined previously. So I plugged it to my assessment framework and generated through AI all the evaluations. And what I found really cool with this assessment framework is that, well, first I didn't invent anything. I took it from Anthropic resources, and it is more likely to be the same that your data team will use for other areas of their assessment. And this, to me, illustrates something very important. The fact that now, more than ever, the boundaries between engineering, product, design, content are thinner than ever. And it is true because we share tools, we share methodologies, we share frameworks. So, in my opinion, even though quality is still very hard to define and to assess, it's more true than ever that we cannot afford to look at quality from a single point of view. Thank you very much for your attention, and let's have a question.